When my wife filed for divorce, it felt like someone had quietly pulled the floor out from under my life. 10 years of marriage ended in a few cold conversations, a stack of legal papers, and a lot of things suddenly being divided into yours and mine. Unfortunately for me, most of the valuable things ended up in her column. She kept the house we had bought together 3 years earlier. She took the car we had just finished paying off. Worst of all, she drained our joint savings account, the one I had spent nearly a decade slowly building. Every extra shift, every bonus from work, every small sacrifice had gone into that account. By the time the divorce was finalized, there had been about $86,000 sitting in it, and just like that, it was gone. During the final meeting with the lawyers, she sat across the table from me looking completely calm, as if we were discussing the weather instead of dismantling a life. When the last items were being divided, her lawyer mentioned a storage unit listed under both of our names. I honestly had forgotten about it years earlier, when we moved apartments. We had rented the unit to store a few boxes we didn't need immediately. Over time, we both stopped thinking about it. I assumed it held old furniture, dusty books, maybe some childhood junk. My ex-wife barely looked up when the lawyer mentioned it. "You can keep the storage unit," she said with a small shrug. "It's probably just garbage anyway." Her tone made it sound like she was doing me a favor. I didn't argue at that point. I was too exhausted to care about old boxes, sitting in some forgotten building across town. If she wanted the savings in the house, fine. I'd take the unit and whatever useless things were inside. A week after the divorce was finalized, I was still living in a small rented apartment, surrounded by the few things I had managed to keep. One evening, while sorting through paperwork, I found the storage contract again. The monthly fee had been automatically paid for years. That bothered me if I was paying for it. I should at least see what was inside. 2 weeks later, on a gray Saturday afternoon, I drove to the storage facility. It sat near the edge of town, behind a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The place looked old and half-forgotten, rows of metal doors stretching across the lot like giant filing cabinets. The office manager checked my ID and handed me the access code. "Unit C17, he said, far corner." The unit was exactly where he said it would be, tucked away at the end of a dusty row. The metal door was scratched and faded. A thick layer of dirt covered the ground in front of it, and the padlock hanging from the latch was coated in rust. For a moment I almost turned around. Opening it felt pointless. I already knew what I would find. Broken chairs, boxes of old clothes, maybe a lamp that didn't work anymore. But I had come this far. I slipped the key into the lock. It resisted at first like it hadn't been moved in years. After a few seconds of twisting, the lock finally clicked open. I pulled the metal door upward. It rattled loudly as it rolled along the track, echoing through the quiet storage yard. In the moment the door lifted high enough for me to see inside, I realized this storage unit was nothing like I expected. When the metal door finally rolled all the way up, I stood there for a moment, confused by what I was looking at. The storage unit wasn't filled with random household junk, like I expected. Instead, the space was neatly organized. Wooden crates were stacked carefully along the walls. From floor to ceiling, there were at least 20 of them. Maybe more. Each crate looked old but well preserved. Thick wood panels, metal corner brackets, and faded shipping labels stuck to the sides. For a second, I wondered if I had somehow opened the wrong unit. But the number painted on the wall clearly said C17. I stepped inside slowly. The air smelled dusty but dry, like something that had been sealed away for a very long time. A thin layer of dirt covered the floor, but the crates themselves looked untouched. I knelt beside the closest one. A faded shipping sticker on the side caught my attention. The print was barely readable, but I could still make out a date, 1983. That didn't make sense. My ex-wife and I had only rented the unit about 8 years ago. These crates had apparently been stored here decades before that. Maybe the labels were reused boxes. I told myself curiosity got the better of me. I searched around and found an old crowbar, leaning against the back wall of the unit. Someone must have left it there years ago. Using it, I pried open the top of the nearest crate. The wood creaked loudly before the lid finally popped loose. Inside were stacks of comic books. Dozens of them. Each one was sealed in a clear, plastic protective sleeve with a cardboard backing. They were arranged in perfect rows, like someone had carefully packed them for storage. I stared at them for a moment and laughed. "So this is the treasure, huh?" I muttered to myself. "Old comic books." My wife had taken the house, the car, and every dollar in our savings account, and left me with a room full of dusty comics from the 80s. At the time, it felt almost insulting. Still, something about the careful packaging made me pause. Whoever stored these hadn't treated them like worthless paper. They looked preserved, protected, important. I picked up the first comic from the top of the stack. The cover art was bright and colorful despite its age. A famous superhero stood in a dramatic pose while villains surrounded him. In the corner was a small box showing the issue number 1. Even I knew that sometimes first issues could be valuable. Just out of curiosity, I pulled out my phone and searched the title online. The results loaded slowly when the price appeared on the screen. I blinked twice to make sure I wasn't reading it wrong. One listing showed the same comic, same issue number, same year, selling for $38,000. Another auction listing showed $41,500. My heart started beating faster. No way, I whispered. That had to be a mistake. Maybe those were rare copies or special editions. But when I looked closer at the comic in my hand, I noticed something printed on the protective sleeve. Professional grading certificate. Hands suddenly shaking. I carefully placed the comic back and opened another crate. Then another and another. Inside them were not just comics. There were sealed action figures, vintage trading cards, and collectible toys still in their original packaging. Every single item looked like it had been preserved for decades. Standing in the middle of that storage unit, surrounded by crates of collectibles, I started to realize something. My ex-wife hadn't left me a useless storage unit. She might have left me something far more valuable. I barely slept that night after discovering the comics. I stayed in the storage unit for hours, opening crate after crate. Every box seemed to contain something. Valuable rare comic book issues from the late 70s and early 80s, vintage action figures still sealed in their original packaging, even stacks of sports trading cards protected in plastic cases. Some of the names on the boxes were familiar, even to someone like me who wasn't a collector. Spider-Man, Batman, X-Men, Star Wars. Each item looked like it had been preserved with extreme care. Whoever packed these crates knew exactly what they were doing. By the time the sun went down, I had only opened about half of the boxes. My phone battery was almost dead from searching prices online. Every result I saw made my head spin. A comic I checked earlier had sold for over $40,000. The sealed action figure from the 1980s was listed for $12,000. Even some of the trading cards were selling for thousands. But I still didn't trust my own research. Online listings could be misleading. Maybe the items inside my unit weren't in the same condition. Maybe they weren't as rare as I thought. I needed someone who actually understood this world. The next morning, I called a collectibles appraisal company I found online. The man who answered introduced himself as Daniel. When I briefly explained what I had found, he sounded skeptical at first. "People find old comics all the time," he said politely. "Most of them aren't worth much." "I understand," I replied, "but I think these might be different." After a short pause, he agreed to come. Take a look later that afternoon. A gray sedan pulled into the storage facility parking lot. A man in his late 50s stepped out, carrying a leather bag and a small inspection light. "Daniel," he said, shaking my hand. I led him to Unit C-17. The moment the metal door rolled open, his entire expression changed. He stepped inside, slowly scanning the stacks of crates. "Where did you say you got these?" he asked quietly. "They were already here," I replied. "Part of a storage unit my ex-wife left me in the divorce." He knelt beside one crate and carefully removed a comic, pulling a pair of gloves from his bag. He examined the cover under the light. For several minutes he didn't say anything. Then he opened another crate and another. With each item he inspected, his eyebrows rose higher finally. He stood up and looked directly at me. "Do you realize what you're standing on?" he asked. I shook my head. Daniel took a slow breath before speaking again. "This isn't just a random collection," he said. "Whoever assembled this knew exactly which items would become valuable." He pointed toward the stacks of crates surrounding us. Many of these are first-print comics, early limited edition toys, and high-grade trading cards. The condition alone makes them extremely rare. My stomach tightened. "So what does that mean?" I asked carefully. Daniel closed his notebook and gave a small, almost disbelieving smile. "It means," he said, "that this storage unit could be worth several $1,000,000. For a moment the words didn't fully register in my mind. Then he added one final sentence. "We won't know the exact number until we catalog everything. But my early estimate," he paused, "around $5 million. For several seconds after Daniel said the number, I just stood there staring at him. "5 million, I repeated quietly. It sounded ridiculous, impossible. Just a day earlier I had been a recently divorced man, living in a small rented apartment with barely any savings left. Now someone was telling me the dusty storage unit my ex-wife had dismissed as junk could be worth millions. Daniel nodded calmly. That's a rough estimate. He explained it could end up being a little lower or even higher, depending on auction demand. Some of these pieces are extremely rare in this condition. He carefully closed the crate he had been examining and stood up. The most important thing right now, he continued, is documentation and protection. These items need to be cataloged, insured, and eventually sold through the right auction houses. I felt like my brain was struggling to keep up. How long would something like that take? I asked. A few months, Daniel said, but if you do it correctly, collectors from all over the world will compete for them over the next several weeks. That's exactly what happened. Daniel and his team returned with cameras, gloves, and professional equipment. Every comic trading card and collectible figure was carefully photographed and recorded. Some items were sent to grading companies to verify their condition and authenticity. The results were even better than Daniel's early estimate. Several of the comics were first print issues that collectors had been searching for years. One sealed action figure from a famous 1980s toy line turned out to be incredibly rare, and the trading cards included multiple limited edition rookie cards that had skyrocketed in value. Eventually, the collection was divided between several major auctions. The first auction alone brought in over $1.8 million. I remember sitting at home watching the bidding online, as collectors fought over items I had discovered in dusty wooden crates. Each time the numbers climbed higher. It felt surreal, but the story didn't stay quiet for long. At some point, word reached my ex-wife one evening. My phone buzzed with a message from a number I still recognized. I heard about the storage unit. We need to talk. I didn't respond. The next day, another message arrived. Half of that money belongs to me. That time I did answer, but not directly. Instead, I forwarded the message to my lawyer. A few days later, he called me. You're completely protected. He said the divorce agreement clearly states she took the savings account and surrendered any claim to the storage unit and its contents. In other words, the choice had been hers. She had taken the quick money and walked away from the unknown. By the time the final auctions ended, the total sales reached just over $5.4 million after fees and taxes. I was still left with more money than I had ever imagined having in my life. Sometimes I still think back to that final divorce meeting. My ex-wife leaning back in her chair, her careless shrug. You can keep the storage unit, she had said at the time. It felt like she was throwing me scraps. But in the end, that one small decision changed everything. Because the junk she didn't want turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me.